Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Hello friends, and welcome once again to Encounter. On behalf of the Broome County Council of Churches, I'm Gary Doupe.
As you can tell, I am not Gary Doupe. My name is Joe Sellepack. I'm the Executive Director at the Broome County Council of Churches and your host today for Encounter. But we are going to talk about the Encounter Show as an entity of the Council of Churches. As many of you are aware, this is the 75th anniversary of the Council of Churches, and we've been celebrating some very huge milestones at the Council. 40 years of CHOW, 20 years of Faith in Action volunteers. Well, it's also the 41st anniversary of the Encounter Show. The Encounter Show was put on in 1975 as the Encounter Show. Before that, it had a history, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But one of the things that the Encounter Show has always done is help the congregations in our area to encounter the community, and the community to figure out, well, what does this whole church thing mean? It's really been a two-way street. We've had lots of different subjects that we've covered on Encounter, all the way from just in my tenure here, all the way from events that are happening in the community through some of the theological controversies that are part of church life, and we've encountered all of them, and it's been a great journey that I think we should celebrate. 41 years is a long time to be on the television, don't you think? What do you think? 41 years.
Hard to imagine.
Hard to imagine.
When I first was asked to host, it was, as you said, called Church Day. And the Reverend Lou Curlin, who was the executive director, was host of that. And so when they asked me to do it, I thought about it and I said, well, okay, I'll do it, but could we change the name? And so I came up with Encounter.
Encounter.
And I'd open up the program with Welcome to Encounter, where we encounter God and the people, the events, and the ideas that may come our way. And enjoyed having people respond to that.
And my guests today are the Reverend Jim Jones, who's an associate minister currently with Christ Episcopal Church, and Gary Doupe, who did the intro for us from an old, I don't even know what year that was. Can you tell?
Sometime, I don't know which year.
No, it wasn't. It was back a while ago. But Gary Doupe, who's the current interim pastor at Centenary-Chenango United Methodist Church. Welcome to Encounter.
Thank you.
So you know, the idea of it being an encounter was very, very much a part of what why you thought the name change was important.
Right.
What's some of the ideas behind that?
Well, it's when I began the program and talked with the committee. Phil Mitchell was the chairman of the radio and TV committee of the council, and we talked about kind of behind that, what are we trying to do? And it is to really look out into the community, the religious and secular community, and see where God was acting, and in our lives and in the lives of other people. And so it was a great opportunity for me and everyone to really challenge ourselves by the ideas and that other people came with that was slightly different than my own. And I tell you, in the 4 years that I did it, I learned an awful lot, in my own ideas of God really expanded as He is related to each one of us.
Mm-hmm. And Gary, did you experience the same thing?
I think very much. And what was kind of exciting after, building on the work that had been done by 3 or 4 people before my time, we had, by that point, a lot of people in the community who were aware of Encounter and who wanted to be on the program. So sometimes I didn't have to really work hard to find guests, but I found people who themselves wanted to encounter the churches and the members of the community, and were eager to be guests, and that made the project so much easier and so delightful. And for me, the doors were rather wide open, and they told me I could invite whoever I might enjoy having, and we had people representing virtually all of the religious traditions of the Triple Cities. Mm-hmm. We made clear it was not for Christians only, but we wanted to really be in dialogue with everyone. And then, of course, all of the offshoots from the council's work. The jail ministry gave rise to some programs. Lieutenant Sheridan from the Broome County Jail was a wonderful guest, and talking about the therapeutic pod, and people in various other areas of social services in the community enriched our lives by explaining to us what was happening and what the needs of people were.
These seem to be really common themes, because as we look at our most recent shows, we've had guests on who've talked about child sex trafficking. We've had guests on who've talked about depression and elderly. We've done things on exercise and the importance of exercise and aging. We've talked about diet. We've also talked about the when the various congregations all came together to support a statement on religious inclusion and diversity. We were a part of that conversation. We had people on who were talking about the importance of sending food to Syrian refugees. When you start looking at the history of what you all were a part of, Encounter Show is still very much a part of that kind of a conversation. And we'll talk about Pentecost or Easter or other Christian things, but we also have on Jewish guests and Muslim guests and Unitarian guests and folks of no particular faith, as long as we can have a fairly civil conversation with each other and be able to learn from each other. It seems like that's the key part of it, isn't it? Absolutely. One of the guests from whom I always learned immensely when I had him on the program, and it was only maybe a couple of times, Richard Antoon, who taught at the university, and who had deep contacts with the Jewish, the Muslim, and Christian communities. His family came out of Lebanon, out of one part of the Christian tradition that's prominent in the Middle East, and his wife was Jewish, and he studied with an imam in Jordan when he was doing field work, and his knowledge of the setting of some of the cultural and historical, political circumstances of what we were talking about as the crises began to unfold in the Middle East. That was just invaluable. And here was someone who really could relate very deeply in many contexts. And somehow his faith transcended all of them in many ways.
Some of the things that you mentioned that you covered recently brings back to mind many of the programs that we had at the beginning. I mean, we were talking about decriminalizing marijuana way back then. I mean, it's still an issue. And 41 years later. And so a lot of the issues that we covered way back when is still things that we talk about. And, bringing the religious emphasis upon that. And when we look at our culture today around us, and we see how sort of coarse it's become, even in our politics today, just what is being said, the violence, the animosity, and all these other things that are going on, and it reflects our whole culture. And the question is, where's the role of the church in all of that? Mm-hmm. And I think that this is one of the things that I felt Encounter was one avenue of getting to some of that, because human nature doesn't change much.
No.
And so things that we were dealing with back in the 70s are still issues today that we really need to, as the church, not bring everybody, as you say, to become a Christian, but to begin to look at the values that we live by, how we treat one another, what is our relationship with one another.
Right.
And I just, our clericus has begun reading a book as on the second Jim Crow.
Oh, yeah.
We're reading that book, and just the history of how the black
the new Jim
community,
Crow.
How the black community has been, from the time of slavery, really treated unjustly.
And some of the, you're spot on. I mean, because some of the debates in the 70s are still some of the debates that are current today, like sentencing. Sentencing was a big issue in the 70s, and we take a major turn to incarceration that kind of led to defining an entire generation of people according to what happened to them when they were sentenced.
Oh, yeah.
And so now they have to check that box off all the time wherever they go. It kind of follows them through the rest of their life. You end up with that. You end up with a heroin epidemic currently, and now we're finding out that you need to treat it as a medical condition, not so much as a criminal condition. And we understand that because we talked about it in the 70s. We knew back then, 41 years ago, that the current way that we approach these things is not working. So it seems to me as if, and one of the things that the church has always been fairly good at is bringing together people of different ideologies and ideas, and then to have them be able to talk about it in the spirit of love, of kindness, of care, of compassion. These are the fruits of this. We talk about them as being the fruits of the Spirit, right? But really, I mean, they aren't just parts of my own personal life. They happen in relationship, don't they?
And we learn as we are in dialogue with various religious traditions that Christians are not alone in the understanding of this golden rule of dealing with others as you would wish to be dealt with. Every major world religion teaches that truth.
It does.
And so we find the commonalities that we have that are really deep parts of our traditions, but sometimes in common conversation, that's not always recognized, or it's forgotten.
Yes.
And in relationship to some of the major events, again, my guests are Reverend Jim Jones and Reverend Gary Doupe, who have been previous Encounter hosts. Gary, you have an interesting story about an Encounter episode that happened.
Well, I suppose you're referring to what happened on the 9/11 of 2001.
Yeah.
We were in the studio waiting to record the session on a Monday morning, as I recall. And while we were waiting to go into the set, began to see on monitors that a plane had struck the World Trade Center. And as we entered in and sat at the table or in our chairs, the person doing weather came over and said, the second tower has been now struck. The musicians that I had on the program that day, there were two members of a musical group called Unity Group, and they had brought with them guitar and saxophone and a variety of esoteric instruments that Rob Weinberger played very well, including a set of steel pan drums. And these two guys, and Harris Thor, and Rob Weinberger began to play. And they played in response to what was going on the television screen of what was happening in New York City. And the improvisation for me was unbelievable. And I sort of made up a title for it, something of a poem in awe of the world be emerging, or something like that. I don't remember my words, but it was a moving moment for us all. And their gift of music and improvisation was so appropriate to that.
Mm-hmm. It seems to me, that's one response to a tragic event. But then the other response that we've seen played out in politics, and Jim, you alluded to this earlier, has been to get more coarse and more divided, and to get more strongly building walls or building barriers between people. And the tragedy of 9/11 itself is an interesting thing to look back on, because we often I remember what it was like in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, and the political dialogue that went on, and it seems like we haven't escaped some of the pain from that one event, and we really need to deal with that, don't we?
It's deeply with us.
Right.
I think as we watch the reconstruction going on, which continues to this day, and it won't be finished for a while, I see the dialogue as people respond to watching this new thing emerge in Lower Manhattan, but they're always remembering what was happening to them and the losses that they personally suffered as friends disappeared in those buildings. And I think too, we are still perplexed about how do we deal with what seems so irrational. But how do we deal also with our own complicity in the violence that is a part of the international scene? And how do we free ourselves rather than get more somehow deeply caught in the never-ending retribution?
Yeah. And what would Encounter say to our community that kind of leads itself to a different type of conversation, do you think, Jim?
Yes, I think that part of it is really, as I mentioned before, in our relationship with one another, because that's where it all begins, how we treat our neighbor. No matter what their background is, I mean, they are a human being created by God in His image, and that we should be able to encounter the God that is in them, no matter who they are, because the spark of life is within each one of us, and we need to recognize that. And if every person looked to the other person with love and compassion and understanding, we don't have to agree. All we have to do is to respect the person. And I think if it starts with each one of us, it can spread. And I think that's the message Jesus brought. Started out with 12, and spread from there. And it says, go out into the world, and so I think that's our charge also, is to go out into the world and encounter God in everyone, and respect and have a concern for everyone. And if everybody's doing that in the world, hey, all our problems are solved.
You're so profoundly right. I don't know, is it Sanskrit that the word namaste comes from? But it has to do, I think, with recognizing that wholeness, that divinity in each other individual. If we can start at that point, as you said, Jim, that's a big step.
Gary, I know you and I share a common love of a person named William Stringfellow, and one of the things that he talked about in a lot of his writings is that each biography, each person's story is an element of the gospel. or is where you can experience, where you can find where God is experiencing the world and the world is experiencing God. We all carry with us, because of that divine spark that exists within each one of us, the ability, or even the mystery of how God encounters the world through us. So it's just a very interesting idea. And how would that, that divine interaction kind of temper the conversation that we have with each other? Because we can talk about hard truths, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like saying, we need to buy into every philosophy that ever exists within the world. There has to be some kind of rational distinction that we make. But
at the same time, all of our distinctions are kind of transcended by images that we really can't fully define. For example, this last Sunday, for many of us, we celebrated Pentecost Sunday, and this coming Sunday, as we were talking, it's Trinity, and I continue talking